All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our panel discussion where we'll be talking about the conservation of the Hellbender in Indiana. We do have a few expert panelists with us today that are going to be able to present on this topic, which is super exciting. And I'm going to introduce all of them here in just a few minutes. But before that, I wanted to let you all know who else you're going to be seeing on this and some housekeeping things. So my name is Mariah Mason. I work for the Indiana DNR at the Division of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm going to be hosting this panel. So if you hear a disembodied voice asking a question, that's probably me, but I will try to put myself up on the screen when I can do that. This is still a pretty new webinar platform for us, so I would just ask for your grace and patience if we run into any technical issues, which hopefully will not happen tonight. And my colleague, Sam Fain, is also on this call. She's going to be co-hosting with me today and is going to be managing our question and answer feature for this event. So just know that you can ask questions throughout the event. We'll get into that more later, but you should be able to see a question and answer tab or like a chat. You can type your questions in there. We'll be able to see those. And then in the second half of our event today, we will give those questions to our panelists. The event's going to go ahead and start out with our panelists answering some predetermined questions. That's going to give us all just a good foundation and background about Hellbenders and about their population efforts here in Indiana. And then after that part of the presentation happens, we'll have time for that audience Q&A. So the questions will be in the latter half of the event. I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that and kind of what that flow would look like. Please remember that you can submit the question anytime throughout the event, so you don't have to hold off on submitting them until the end. Like I said before, you can put those in at any time and we will just hold off and direct those to the appropriate panelists at the end. Let's see here, a couple of other housekeeping things just about the Teams live webinar platform. So you should be able to see a small button on your screen with two C's inside of a box. That is the closed caption button. So if you would like to see closed captions, which are auto-generated by Teams throughout this event, you can click on that and you should be able to see an auto-generated closed caption feature that comes up. Another note about this platform, if your event happens to pause, so if you toggle to the chat to put in a question, sometimes the event will pause for whatever reason, or if you leave your window and it pauses, just know that you can hit the play button and it'll start back up where you left off. So you might be watching at a little bit of a lag, but you shouldn't miss anything, so that's good. And you could also try refreshing it. So if you have technological issues, you can put those in the chat and we'll do our best to answer, but just know that those are the most common things that we see. Let's see here. Another note, so during this event, we will have a few videos that we're going to play just to kind of show the things that we're talking about, so hopefully that'll be helpful. And know that those videos are not supposed to have audio. So your computer's not broken or anything like that. If you if you don't hear anything from the video, we want to make sure that our panelists can speak over the video and kind of explain what's going on. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. And with that, we will get started. So let's see here. I wanted to go ahead and send a thanks to all of our partners. So before we jump into introducing the panelists, which is next, this slide shows all of our partners. So while we have a few partners with us today who are super experts on Hellbenders and we're going to learn a lot from them, there are tons of hands that go into this project. It's very widespread. There are a lot of people who are really passionate and collaborating to restore Hellbender populations in Indiana. And so we wanted to make sure that we're acknowledging those folks and their efforts and thanking them. So please take a look at this screen and just know that there are a lot of hands in the pot trying to make this better for Hellbenders. And with that, I will introduce our first panelist. So Nick Bergmeyer is joining us today from his alma mater, which is Purdue University. Nick has his bachelor's and master's degrees in wildlife science, and he has been working to restore Hellbender populations in Indiana since 2007, both as a master's student and then also professionally. And then next up, we have Nate Ingbert, who is the Indiana State herpetologist for the DNR and has been since 2017. Nate has both a bachelor's and master's degree in science and has been working with the DNR's annual Hellbender survey since 2004. And then finally, we have Lee Ramon, who's joining us from Mesker Park Zoo and Botanic Gardens. Lee has a bachelor's and master's degree as well, and is also the animal curator at Mesker Park Zoo and Botanic Gardens currently and since 2014. She's worked in the zoo field for 20 years and says that she could not be more excited to be involved in the efforts to help Hellbender populations in Indiana. And we could definitely not be more excited to have her and all of our other panelists on this project. So, and then we had a fourth panelist, but unfortunately our panelist from the Kentucky DNR had an unexpected conflict arise, so he won't be able to join us today. However, I'm confident that our other panelists will be able to seamlessly fill in, and we will get all of the answers that we need to the audience. So with that, we have our very first question, which is pretty important to this topic, and it is, what is a hellbender? So Lee, can you please answer this for us, get into what a hellbender is, and just give us that good foundation that we're going to need?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. I will try to not go on too much because there's a lot to say about the hellbender, but let me give you the quick and dirty 101. So hellbenders are the largest salamander in the US, the second largest in the world. At full grown as an adult, they can be up to 2 feet in length, which is pretty incredible for a salamander. They are a fully aquatic species, meaning they spend their entire life underneath the water. So that's from laying eggs to breathing to eating. Everything they do is in the water. They breathe through their skin, so it is very important for them to have cool water, fast-moving water, as the water moves quickly and churns in the rivers and streams where they live. That oxygenates the water and then allows them to breathe that. It's also very important that they have clean water, just like all the amphibians. Their skin is very sensitive to contaminants, and they can take in those contaminants into their body. As far as what they eat, they can eat crayfish. That's, I think, number 1 on their list, but they also do eat fish that are smaller than them, and invertebrates. So as they grow, they can start to eat larger and larger food items. And predators, their main predators are probably raccoons and otters. When they're small, fish can eat them. They get a lot harder to eat as they get bigger. And as you see in this video that's playing here, they can eat quite large prey. So this is a very young animal, and it has a nice sized minnow, almost the size of itself, in its mouth here. They can live up to 35 years. 30 to 35 is pretty common for the species, which is pretty incredible. So their time to reproduction is a little slower. As animals live longer, they can take more time to develop when they're young and be ready to reproduce. So they're about 5 to 7 years old when they start reproducing. The females will lay eggs in a nest, and those eggs will hatch into tadpoles. They then will, tadpole-like, I guess, and then they'll grow their extremities a little bit later. Arms and legs come kind of as they age. The really neat thing about their reproduction is that the males do the care for the eggs until the hellbenders hatch. So the females just come into a nest that the male has prepared. They'll lay their eggs and then leave. And then that's the extent of what the female does with the offspring. And then the males will stay and they'll guard the nest from potential predators that can be crayfish, fish, even other hellbenders. And they'll also fan their tail back and forth to rotate the eggs to keep them healthy and allow them to incubate. And after about 2 months, those eggs will hatch, and then they will, the hellbenders will kind of swim into the rock bed underneath them, and then the male's job is done, and he can go back about his business. And I think I'll stop there. If you have more questions about hellbenders, please put them in the chat and we'll talk about it later.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lee. I really appreciate it. So cool to hear that we have such strong father figures in the Hellbender community. We'll have to remember that for like our Father's Day posts on social media here at DFW. So we will go ahead and move on to our next question, which is, there we go. Which is, why are hellbenders important to our ecosystem and humans? So Nate, could you tackle that one for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Like Lee mentioned, hellbenders kind of serve as both predator and prey in the rivers where they live. And so as predators, they eat mainly crayfish. When hellbenders are adults, they feed on mainly crayfish, so they can help maintain, maybe some balance in those crayfish populations. But they also are eaten by other things. They're just a part of that food chain, that food web that we just see out in nature. And having them in our streams, in addition to just being a cool critter to have in our streams, it really helps kind of provide some balance in the ecosystem when it comes to that predator-prey relationship. Now, if you look at it from kind of an ecosystem level, every species of wildlife in Indiana has its own role that it plays. So the fancy word we use for that is its niche. It has its own niche in the ecosystem. So hellbenders have a niche that's unique to that species, and so do other wildlife, deer, or even like a blue jay. They have their own kind of unique way of living. They may have some similarities with other species, but they each have their own niche. And as these animals have their own niche or their own role, they all together collectively kind of bring things together into producing what's a healthy ecosystem and healthy environment. And I kind of think about this sometimes. I compare it to like different instruments in an orchestra. We've talked about this before, where you think about each animal having its own niche. It's almost like it's playing its own instrument. And collectively, they produce this really wonderful symphony. But the issue that we start to wrestle with when it comes to conservation is what happens when we start to lose, different animals, different species from an ecosystem. And you can imagine an orchestra, when you start to pull out, one instrument at a time, and the tune just sounds a little different. And so as a conservation biologist, as a herpetologist, I think about that. It's like, how many species can we lose? How many instruments can we lose from that orchestra of nature before we just no longer recognize the tune? And so we see hellbenders as part of this larger diversity of wildlife in Indiana. We sometimes refer to it as our natural heritage in Indiana. This is part of the species that makes Indiana what it is from like a natural resources standpoint. So I think there's a lot of different things that are cool about a hellbender, but we look at it as an important part of our ecosystem and what part of what makes Indiana, especially in those southern Indiana rivers where they historically occupied and still are hanging on there in the Blue River.
Thank you so much, Nate. I really appreciate that. And I feel like that analogy of the symphony really kind of ties in why hellbenders are so important and why each individual species is so important. So let's go ahead and move on to our next question, which is going to be answered by Nick, who's actually joining us from a different continent. So thank you so much, Nick, for being here with us today. And he is unfortunately not on video, but he is here with us via audio. So y'all should be able to hear him, and we will go ahead and have him answer for us. How have hellbender populations trended across the U.S. and Indiana up to this point? So Nick, can you take that one for us?
Yeah, so a little background. So hellbenders used to be found all the way from Missouri, sort of up the Ohio River, into Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, all the way up to New York, and then down the Appalachian Mountains into like North Georgia, and then even west into little parts of northern Mississippi and Alabama. Unfortunately, about half a century ago, 60 years ago or so, people noticed that hellbenders had really been disappearing from a lot of these areas, and they really experienced severe declines in the latter half of the 20th century, to the point where they're pretty much gone from, or they are gone from Illinois, as far as we know. They're mostly gone from Alabama and Mississippi. There's been one animal discovered in Mississippi in like 20 or 30 years, and that was just a couple years ago. And then in places like Indiana, we used to have hellbenders in most of the rivers that emptied into the Ohio River, but a biologist in the early 80s surveyed most of those rivers for hellbenders because they had noticed or had reports that hellbenders had been disappearing from Indiana, and he found no hellbenders anywhere but the Blue River. So Silver Creek, 14 Mile Creek, several other creeks that they knew had hellbenders, they were all gone. And that's really the trend we've seen in most of the other states, except for up in the more high elevation areas in the Appalachian Mountains. So there's some areas in eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, North Georgia that still really have healthy hellbender populations. And what we would really call healthy would be a population that has sort of an even mix of adults, young juveniles, and larvae. So you can find all those age classes. But a place like Indiana in the Blue River, which we do still have hellbenders, one of the other things that we found was we didn't have all those age classes. We were only finding adult animals. And in the mid-90s, the DNR started doing surveys in the Blue River. And from about the mid-90s up until just a few years ago, it was just adults that were found in the Blue River, and those adults were getting less and less common. So the last river that we had in Indiana was pretty obviously on its way out. And I think that's probably where I'll leave that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was really informative. And I guess kind of piggybacking on that, Nick, can you tell us, when did hellbender conservation efforts start in Indiana then? And how did they expand over time? And how did they expand to include so many wonderful partners?
I guess the first real concerted effort was that biologist in the early 80s that he did his master's work on hellbenders, and he's the one that found that they had disappeared from most places. And then a more organized effort by the Indiana DNR started in the late 90s, where they were surveying specific sites in the Blue River, and they kept noticing those declines. And that led them to approach Dr. Rod Williams with the Forestry and Natural Resources Department at Purdue University to start this hellbender program. And that was I think they approached him in 2006. The program started in 2007. And it's been progressing since 2007, where it really started out as sort of focused research to try to find out if there were any problems with our hellbenders, things like any issues with their body condition, or if they were sick, or if there was a water quality issue, really trying to look at the problem. And then that moved into, once we found out there really doesn't seem to be a problem in the Blue River anymore, it seems to be like it was something in the past. And then that moved into this sort of concerted captive rearing and release efforts that you see now. And so we can do, you wanted to know about the partners. The research is relatively easy to do, within a research institute with Purdue. So we can kind of organize that ourselves. But once we moved into this big captive rearing program, that was something that we were not equipped to undertake on our own. So, and nor did we want to. So that's when we started working with Mesker Park Zoo, and then expanded to start working with Fort Wayne Children's Zoo and Indianapolis Zoo and several other zoos around the state, all to help captive rear these hellbenders. But at the same time, we also realized that it's great to put hellbenders back in the river. That helps increase their population and maybe buys them some time. But we also needed to look at the big picture of this, the surrounding landscape, and make sure that habitat is protected. So that's how we started getting involved with organizations like the Nature Conservancy and the Natural Resources Conservation Service and local soil and water conservation districts, to make sure that not only are we putting hellbenders back in the river, but we're also protecting the river and the surrounding landscape, so they'll have a healthy place to live in the future, and we won't run into this problem again. And I think that's where I'll leave that.
All right. Thank you so much, Nick. I think that was really important to add, and so great to know that not only are you all planning, and this partnership is planning to reintroduce the hellbenders, but planning for their longevity with making sure that the water is clear and clean for them, so they'll be able to thrive in that environment. So before we go on to our next question, I just wanted to clarify something to make sure I'm understanding right. Nick, when you're talking about captive rearing, does that just mean that you're raising hellbenders in captivity, or I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that correctly?
Yes, captive rearing is just raising, collecting hellbender eggs in the wild and then raising those in captivity until a point they're old enough to release back into the landscape.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you so much. That makes total sense. And that way those eggs can be protected and such while they are captively reared. So that definitely makes sense. So let's go on to our next question here. And we'll direct this question to Lee, please, first. So Lee, can you tell us a little bit about how your organization contributes to the population restoration efforts for hellbenders? What does that look like for Mesker Park Zoo and Botanic Gardens?
Sure. We have a couple different ways that we help out, and one is rearing of young animals, and then we also have something going on with adults. So I'll start talking about the little guys. So we, Nick goes out in the river and he collects eggs, and he'll talk a little bit about how that works later, but then he gives us a call and says, I found a nest, I have eggs, are you ready for me? And of course we always are. So he brings the eggs to us. The eggs come in kind of a clump, a string of pearl clump that they're all kind of tied together, and we separate those out into individual eggs because they roll a little bit better in our system that way. And then we put them into a hammock in the water, and that hammock has an air stone with it that bubbles and allows the eggs to move around, and that keeps them all nice and safe and healthy, just like the male would do with his tail in the wild as they incubate. So we hatch out those eggs and then raise them till they're large enough and ready to go back out into the river. I guess that's the quick and dirty of it. But we keep them for about 4 years. Their last year, they typically go into a mock stream that they kind of learn how to be a hellbender and what it's more simulate what it will be like in the river, allow them to hunt some food with rocks and crevices and have a higher current, so they can understand how to handle all that stuff before they end up back out in the river. So we do that first stage there, and then we also have a stream that mimics a wild stream that we have a group of adult hellbenders in, some of which came out of the blue, and some are from previous collections that have been reared and are of breeding age. And they mingle in our stream, and the hope is to have some captive hatches as well that we can add to the wild population.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lee. That was really helpful. Nick, can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like for Purdue University? So what does Purdue do to contribute to these efforts, and kind of what is their role in all of this?
So Purdue's role is really to coordinate with other states for egg collection, and to actually collect the eggs. So for several years, we attempted to collect eggs in the Blue River in Indiana. And what egg collection looks like is myself and several other biologists will go out, we'll put on wetsuits, snorkels, and dive lights, and we'll swim along the bottom of the river, and we shine our lights under large rocks. I think Lee mentioned it earlier. The males will pick a rock in the stream, and the females the females go to him and lay their eggs and leave, and then the male guards them. Well, usually the male picks a rock that only has one entrance, and he'll guard that entrance with his head just barely stuck out of the end, so he can ward off predators or competitors. And so what we're looking for while we're crawling along the bottom of the stream is that face staring back at us. And once we find that face, we can take a long probe with a little blunt hook on the end, and we can put that under the rock, kind of twist it around. And Lee mentioned the eggs are in in sort of strands of pearls, and that hook will catch those strands, and then we can extract those eggs and put them in a cooler and ship them to whatever zoo or other facility is going to raise those. And so we actually, and this is important to mention, we spent several years mostly failing at finding eggs in Indiana. We found 2 nests in about 5 seasons of work, which is not a great return, and it's not good enough to support a full-scale reintroduction project or restoration project. So we started working with the Ohio DNR and the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, and they have a few streams that are healthy and regularly produce eggs. And so we go to each of those once a year or once every other year, depending on what our capacity is, and we collect eggs from those streams and take those to the zoos. Now, we haven't abandoned looking in Indiana for eggs, but we've just reduced the effort because we just weren't getting the return, and we know we can go to Kentucky and Ohio to get eggs now.
That definitely makes sense. Thank you so much for explaining that. And it's great that we have that teamwork available to help us get the eggs that we're needing for this project. So I guess that leaves Nate as well. Nate, can you kind of tell us a little bit about what the Indiana DNR's role is in all of this?
Sure. Early on, kind of back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the DNR's role basically involved going out and doing those kind of initial surveys at different sampling sites on the Blue River, looking for hellbenders. And like Nick mentioned, around 2007, that kind of transitioned from DNR over to Purdue, and that was supported by actually a series of different what we call state wildlife grants that were issued by the DNR. So our role in probably the last 15 years has gone from doing surveys more to kind of funding Purdue's work, at least a large portion of Purdue's work with doing the hellbender surveys and the research and the captive rearing. And so we've kind of transitioned into that as a supportive role. The money that's used, or at least it traditionally has been used to support a lot of Purdue's research, comes from, I mentioned those state wildlife grants. That's actually funded by donations to the Non-Game Wildlife Fund. So that's actually funded in large part by donations from Hoosiers, from people who might be listening to this presentation right now, probably donate to that, and we really appreciate that. That actually drives so much of our endangered species work in Indiana, a very large portion of it. And with the hellbenders, we can use that money from the Non-Game Wildlife Fund, and then we can actually get money from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, from the federal government, and use the money that's donated to that fund as match. And collectively, that drove a lot of the early research. Now, Purdue's actually been able to get funding from other sources as well. The zoos have come on, and they support us through their own funding. They support the project through their funding. But the DNR's role now has been funding, also just working closely with the Purdue researchers to kind of make decisions about the direction of the Hellbender program, what release sites might look like, future research. We meet with these guys once or twice a year, just the DNR and Purdue folks. Then this week we've got a larger meeting coming up with all of our Hellbender partners. We do that twice a year. And then in the last few years, my crew here in the DNR herpetology program and I have been going out in the field with Nick and his gang, or splitting up at different sites, searching for those eggs. We could not find them in the Blue River, so we've now transitioned into searching for young hellbender larvae at one of our release sites to see if those hellbenders are reproducing naturally. And we have signs now that they are, which is really exciting. We'll talk about that here in a bit. But yeah, so our role's kind of been multifaceted, but we just continue to try to support things financially and decision making and some of the field research here more recently.
Awesome.
If I could do a quick follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it, Nick.
Well, I got excited about talking about the egg collection, and I forgot to mention the rest of our role, which thankfully Nate sort of mentioned a little bit, is that we actually coordinate most of the hellbender work within the state and between the Indiana and Kentucky and all of our partners. And we also do a lot of captive rearing research to improve the survival of these captive raised animals before they get released. One of the things that a lot of past experiences with other wildlife releases are that the animals are a lot like pets and they don't do very well. So one of the things we wanted to avoid was basically releasing captive raised pets. And so we do a lot of research in captivity to to improve survival once we release those animals. And that research looks like it's gone pretty well. So I just got excited about egg collection and forgot to mention those other things that we do.
Yeah, I guess I'll tag on to Nick's tag on is that I guess I kind of want to give credit to Purdue on this. They have been truly on the front lines of doing Hellbender captive rearing research in Indiana. They're doing stuff that, as far as I know, as far as the research they're doing on this, no one's doing. And so Indiana, by way of that, has kind of become a leader in Hellbender conservation and recovery. There's awesome things going on in Ohio and Missouri and other places, but it's been a great investment of our financial resources into this project as Purdue does some cutting edge stuff, learning how to increase survival in these hellbenders after they're released. And again, the zoo's coming alongside and now have the information to be able to kind of implement that in their captive rearing as they carry so much of the load for raising these animals.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for making those additions. And I feel like that really painted a clear picture of what each organization's role is in this project. And Nick, I can totally understand why you would get kind of tied up with that egg collection. That sounds like such a cool day in the office. I'm sure not every day is like that, but that sounds really, really fun. So very, very cool to learn about that. And so we did touch on this next question a little bit, but Nate, did you have anything you'd like to add to the discussion about how and where Hellbender eggs are collected?
Yeah, just briefly, like Nick mentioned, we used to be able to get eggs out of the Blue River. Nick has had the satisfaction of actually finding eggs in the Blue River. I have not yet. It's hard to go out and look for them and not find them. It kind of wears you down, but we have been really fortunate to have our partners in Ohio and Kentucky, local agencies over there supporting our work and bringing in Hellbender eggs. That's helped, first of all, just provide us with eggs and eventual Hellbenders to release into the wild, but it's also helped us address some potential inbreeding issues that can happen when you're only using eggs from the same site year after year in Indiana. Bringing in eggs from outside of state is helping with some of the genetic diversity things and to prevent the inbreeding, at least reduce that. And so huge thanks to those guys in our neighboring states for helping us out. I wish Zach from Kentucky could have been here, but he knows that we appreciate that. And so I guess that's just what I wanted to mention. There's a lot of benefits beyond even just getting eggs. It's really helping us on the genetic level when it comes to Hellbender, introducing them and repopulating these sites.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. We will go ahead and move on to our next question now, which we will direct toward Lee. So Lee, can you tell us how are Hellbenders raised in captivity? What does that look like?
Yeah, so like I said before, they do need clean, cool water. So I think a really important thing getting started with preparing habitat for Hellbenders is to have a really good chiller. We keep the water about 55 degrees in the winter, and then it goes up to maybe 62 in the summer. And we have 3 different types of filtration on every single unit that houses Hellbenders. And that includes the egg rearing system, and then we have a juvenile system, and which you can kind of see there on the left in our stream. That blue room there is the one at Mesker, and it looks like that other one I think might be at Purdue. So they look very similar, and yeah, that's our mock stream, and it also needs to have fast flowing water so it can be highly oxygenated. So there's a lot of rippling, there's a lot of noise in those rooms, there's pumps moving, filters moving, moving that water around. So starting with the eggs, you saw them rolling around in the hammock and the bubble net there. That's how we incubate eggs. And then as they get older and ready to hatch, they wiggle around and hatch themselves out of those clear eggs that they're in, and then swim down to the bottom. They do have a yolk sac that they'll feed off of for a while. Then as that depletes and their mouth is fully developed, they can start to eat solid foods. So then we move to feeding them solid foods. They get stronger and they grow arms and legs, and They'll lose external gills that they have when they're really young, and then their job is to just eat and grow. And we feed them lots and do lots of water changes to keep the water healthy and clean and clear for them, and allow them to grow until it's time for their pre-release exercising.
Awesome. Thank you, Lee. Just like any other young critter, right? Just like eat, grow, eat, grow.
Yeah.
So can we, Nate, did you have anything that you want to add to that one before we move on?
No, I think she covered it pretty well.
Okay, good deal. Nick, did you have anything? I know Purdue setup looks a little different.
Yeah, she mentioned, I'll just briefly mention the pre-release exercise that we talked about. So that is one of the things we do that we found was good for the Hellbenders before they're released, is that in the past, most Hellbenders were raised in sort of standard aquaria conditions, so just still water, just like a fish. And we felt like that's probably not the best way to ensure survival for something that lives in faster flowing water. So we tested to see what happens if you grow these things in sort of artificial streams with like a natural flow versus an aquarium. And what we found was that in captivity, that really improves their ability to swim upstream. If you put them in a fake stream, if you grow them in a fake stream and put them in a fake stream, they can swim up against current much better than the ones raised in aquaria. And then we released them into the wild, and we tested that same thing and looked at their survival. And what we found was that the ones raised in the fake stream, when combined with a few other methods, they perform much better than the ones that were just sort of raised in sterile aquarium conditions. So that was just a quick thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I'll chime in real quick. I mean, I think that's been one of the really cool parts of the research aspect of what Purdue is doing, is raising these Hellbenders in different conditions. And then when they release them back in the wild, a subset of them have actually had radio transmitters surgically implanted in them. And so they can actually track their movement patterns and also track their survival out in the wild, and kind of see how do the different groups of Hellbenders, depending on how they're raised, how they survive and how much better they do. And then we kind of just, we get some really nice science-based evidence there on what works. And then we can kind of implement that and further improve that survival and as we repopulate those sites.
Awesome. Thank you all for that. It's really great to kind of hear how new developments happen throughout the process, and we're constantly learning more about these critters and how to best support them. So thank you guys for the insights on that. And Nate, I think this next one is also for you. We've touched on it a little bit, but can you tell us some more about how and where rear Hellbenders are released in Indiana?
Yeah, so like we've been talking about, the Blue River is kind of one of the last rivers. It's the last river that's known to have a population, but it's really one of the only rivers left that seems to have really suitable habitat. And so all of the repatriation, the reintroductions, the releases have taken place in the Blue River, and Purdue, through their habitat assessments and research, identified about a dozen sites on the Blue River that they felt were suitable for releasing Hellbenders. They had the right kind of habitat, the right kind of stream flow for Hellbenders to survive. And so we have so far as a group released Hellbenders at about, I think we talked about 4 or 5 sites. 4 or 5 of those dozen or so sites on the Blue River, we've actually released Hellbenders at. We have one site. You can actually see some Hellbenders being released there in that video. It's pretty cool. But we have one site where we've had a large number of Hellbenders released, and so that's kind of become an important monitoring site for us. But yep, those are all decided through habitat evaluations. And next year is a huge release year. We're going to have hundreds of Hellbenders actually going out next year. We don't usually have that many, but we have a ton of them that are going to be ready for release. And by then we will have released Hellbenders at almost every one of those dozen or so sites on the Blue River that were selected for recovery.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Apologies for the tech issues, at least on my end. The video was lagging a little bit, so hopefully everybody could hear that explanation that Nate gave us, and I think that really painted that good picture. So thank you very much for that. So Nick, could you tell us a little bit about what the ultimate goal of these restoration efforts are? So what we paint done? What does the end result look like if everything is successful with this project?
Well, the ultimate goal is the sort of full restoration of Hellbenders to the Blue River and at least one or two other rivers in Indiana, to the point where they are able to sustain themselves without us having to do anything, so that they can just be wild animals again and reproduce and live their own lives, and we don't have to keep putting them back out. What that actually looks like, for the Blue River, we have sort of a criteria that we've laid out, which is that the site that Nate mentioned, the site where we've released a lot of Hellbenders, it's our monitoring site. If we can find 2 successive years of finding actual living babies, so not just eggs, but actual babies. So that proves that they've laid their eggs and those eggs have survived to hatch. So we want to find 2 successive years of that at that one site, plus at least 1 year of that at one of the other sites. So that will give us a pretty clear picture that, okay, we've been releasing them, they've reproduced multiple times, and that reproduction has led to actual successful growth of babies, and that's probably a pretty good measure of the health of our releases at that point. For the other rivers, that's a little less clear, because some of these other rivers we're basically working with a clean slate. They haven't had Hellbenders in them for an extended period of time, so we're still sort of working out what that would look like with those. But we are going to start moving into other rivers soon to sort of to at least advance towards that ultimate goal of establishing multiple populations in Indiana.
Yeah, and I'll add on what Nick said. I mean, one of the big goals that he outlined in the success criteria is that we want these Hellbenders to be able to reproduce themselves in the river. That's been one of the big hangups in recent decades, is that they just aren't fully reproducing themselves. They might lay eggs, but something's breaking down. And so we don't want to get ourselves in a situation where every year we just have to release Hellbenders in order to keep them on the Indiana landscape. We want them to become so established that they are now nesting and that the nests are hatching, and you have the full life cycle taking place naturally in the river, so that they can now begin sustaining themselves. And we have some evidence that we're headed in that direction that I think we'll be talking about here in just a few minutes, but that's a big part of it. I don't know if we commented on it, but in those photos there, you can see that when the Hellbenders are released, they're actually released inside of a cage, a temporary holding cage. So you can kind of see that's us releasing, I think on the right side of those photos there, releasing Hellbenders into the cage. Cage has rock inside of it, and it's kind of enclosed with these wire kind of fencing material, and then it has like a screen mesh over top of it. And when they're released into that cage, we hold them there for about 3 or 4 days. Nick and his coworkers go out and camp out on site and kind of guard the cage, and they're in there for a few days. And then after a few days, after the Hellbenders have had a chance to kind of be protected and just set in there, they take off that outer screen, and then they can kind of move freely. It's called a soft release. You're not just dumping them under a rock. They actually have a little house that they can kind of live in for a few days. But that's what it looks like at a Hellbender release there. It's a pretty special event when we do those things. But once we unzip that thing and take it off, Nick's crew takes that off, they're on their own. And then they can kind of move forward from there.
Awesome. I would imagine that would be a pretty special day to get to kind of witness that and witness the culmination of all of the efforts that have gone into getting to that point. So Nate, can you start off by giving us a status report of current projects? So what's new? Like, how are things going? Goodness, if I can talk. How are things going?
Yeah, they're going well. We just crossed the 500 Hellbenders released threshold this past summer, actually. We've been releasing, it kind of varies year to year, maybe 20 to 80 or maybe a little bit more than that each year. But this year we hit the 500th Hellbender released since full-scale recovery efforts began in 2017. So that was kind of a cool benchmark. I know it's just a number, but it's kind of a neat benchmark for us to hit. The big news for this year was I think it was in either June or July, we were out at the main research site where we've done a lot of our introductions. And I was out there with some of my crew, and Nick was out there with his crew, and we were searching For young hellbenders, we were actually looking to see if the hellbenders had nested and successfully hatched out. We want to see if we had that sign of successful reproduction. And sure enough, we actually found a little baby hellbender, a larval hellbender. You can actually see it. It's hard to see, but in that left photo, we've actually got it in like a plastic bag so we could measure it. I think we've actually got a video that we'll show here pretty soon, but there's this little tiny hellbender about 3 inches long hiding under a rock. And we were super excited when we did that because it showed us that what we were hoping these hellbenders would do, they're actually doing, at this site. And so we don't know if it was the ones that were released who made it and laid those eggs that this one hatched out of, or if it was some older ones that were there, or maybe a mix, but a great sign that things are moving in the right direction. Very encouraging to us, actually, to see that little guy there. That's the only one we found. We got most of the way through the site, a little over halfway through the site, and then we got rained out. But we'll resume surveys next year. It's an annual thing now, surveying the site. And next year, we actually have the opportunity to find hellbenders that hatch out they're actually, just little hatchlings right now. They're in the river right now, and hopefully we can find them next summer, and they'll be a few inches long. And then the age class that we found this past summer, they'll be a bit bigger. So every year we have a chance of seeing hellbenders of different age classes as those ones on site continue to reproduce. That was a huge development that got us really excited, and we want to see more of that moving forward.
How awesome. Congratulations. That's so exciting to hear, and so great to see that these efforts are really producing great results and that that's being acknowledged. So well done to everybody on this call and all of our other partners. Let's see. Nick, do you have anything that you'd like to add to what Nate said?
No, I think Nate actually did a pretty good job covering it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, good deal. So Nate referenced a video. We do have that here for you. Nate, could you tell us a little bit about what's going on while we watch this?
Yeah, when we go out and look for young hellbender larvae, the young ones, like this little guy here, we're actually face down in a river in wetsuits and snorkel masks, looking under rocks, basically looking under small rocks about the size of your hand, and just gently lifting them because that's where these little guys are hanging out. And so this one we caught under the rock, actually the rock right there that's getting ready to go back under. We released it back at that original site. And so after taking some measurements and weighing it and that, we put it back in. Now, if you look close, you can actually see the little gills on the side of the head. The adults don't have that. They actually absorb those gills. That's just a feature of when they're really young like that. But you can see that wrinkled skin on the side of the body. But we put him back in the rock. He sat there for a minute. I had to kind of nudge him with my finger to get him to go back under there. We wanted him to be protected in his little house. But that's the one. I mean, that's the one that made the headlines there, that little guy. And so we just got him back in his little place, and we continued just to kind of do our surveys after that.
Awesome. That's so cool. I'm very glad that you guys got this video while you were out there. It's really cool to be able to see that firsthand and kind of experience what you guys must have experienced after you caught him. So can you tell me, Nate, we'll have you go first, and we'll kind of let everybody on the panel have a chance to discuss this next question. But how can the members of the public, so people who might be listening on this call, other interested parties, how can people help with these efforts? So hopefully we're inspiring a lot of passion for hellbenders during this talk. And if somebody wants to get involved, how can they do that?
Yeah, so we've mentioned this before, but a big driver of the hellbender research and what kind of got this ball rolling were these state wildlife grants that are funded in part by donations to the Non-Game Wildlife Fund. So if people want to get behind hellbender research in Indiana, they can make donations to the Non-Game Wildlife Fund. It actually goes to conserve a lot of different wildlife, not just hellbenders, pretty much all of our endangered species that we work with. And so that's one way. Another way is if you happen to be fishing in the Blue River or even somewhere else, and you somehow catch a hellbender on your line. This happened more historically. People would catch them on their lines, and there were rumors about them being poisonous, which they're not. They're not dangerous, but people would sometimes kill them. What we're asking is if you happen to catch one on your fishing line, just cut the line and let it go. In fact, we don't even really recommend trying to pull the hook out because you could end up injuring it even more. It'd be better just to cut the line and actually let it go free in the water. Hopefully it can kind of work that hook out naturally. But those are just a couple things that you can help with. I think I'll probably hand it over to some of the other panelists here to see if they have any suggestions from their angle, but those are two that come to mind for me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nate. Nick, can you speak to this from Purdue's standpoint? How can members of the public help out?
Yeah, so I think there's really two things. much like Nate was talking, donating to the state wildlife grants, we also have the Help the Hellbender program, which you can check out our website, helpthehellbender.com, and there's instructions if you want to donate to our work. And that usually those donations usually go less towards research and more towards sort of outreach and education efforts and any other stuff that isn't funded by the normal grants that we get from the DNR. But the second way, and this is something everybody can do, is really just anything you can do that helps protect water quality and reduce your impact on rivers and streams is helpful for Hellbender. So things like if you live next to a stream or you live next to a storm drain, anything that reduces runoff into those systems. So riparian buffers are basically leaving an unmown strip of grass or flowers next to the stream or next to the storm drain. Rain gardens, which help absorb water coming off your yard or in wet spots especially, or rain barrels. Anything like that helps, eventually helps in some small part anything that lives in the rivers and streams, including the Hellbenders. So Lee?
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Lee?
Yeah, to expand on what Nick just said, as far as storm drains go, everything that goes into a storm drain ends up in the river. And that includes things like pet waste is something as a citizen of Indiana that houses Hellbenders, a state that houses Hellbenders. That's something really easy you can do in your own yard that really helps the wildlife in the area. So pick up your pet waste, pick up those leaves that are in your driveway or on the road that are at risk of getting swept into the storm drain. Even that adds tannins to the water and helps kind of pollute down the water system. So the more of that you can get out of the storm drain, the better off they are. Reducing your use of pesticides and fertilizers can also help water quality. And in another vein, I think being here tonight and learning about Hellbenders and then helping us spread the word is one of the most important things you can do. They're an amazing animal that lives in Indiana, and as a citizen, it's our duty to help save them.
Yeah, and one of the cool things about, trying to improve water quality for Hellbenders is that it just improves water quality for so many other species. There's all kinds of fish, freshwater mussels that benefit from that. Even people, nobody wants dirty rivers. Everybody likes clean water. So managing, in ways that benefit Hellbenders just benefits just a ton of other species.
Absolutely. Great point. And what great suggestions. I didn't know there were so many things that, just a person who's not necessarily in the conservation field, but just a member of the public who wants to help could do to protect our water quality, both for Hellbenders and for other species. So thank you all so much for that great information. And with that, we are going to go ahead and jump into the audience Q&A portion of our event. So actually, I guess right before we do that, I apologize. I misspoke there. I want to make sure that we have the chance to look at this slide here. So as we mentioned, this work takes funding, obviously. And I think everybody touched on this a little bit, but to support rare and endangered species work here in Indiana, the Non-Game Wildlife Fund really does a lot of that funding. So if you are interested in that, if you're interested in just staying up to date on new developments with Hellbenders or with other rare and endangered species, you can go to the link on the left, and I'll leave this up for a second. So if you want to take a photo or copy down the link, you can. But that link on the left allows you to sign up for the Non-Game Wildlife Fund newsletter. And during that, we kind of put out information about new developments, both for Hellbenders and other rare and endangered species in Indiana. And on the right, you can see that there's the link and the QR code to donate to the Non-Game Wildlife Fund if you're so moved to do so. Please just know that that exists, and that is how all of this great work gets done. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move things over to the audience Q&A section and turn things over to my colleague, Sam, who will be directing your questions to the appropriate panelists. Sam?
Thanks, Mariah, and thanks, Nate and Lee and Nick. That was really wonderful to hear. We have a lot of questions from the audience. So the first thing I wanted to check in about was the Hellbender releases. People are wanting to know, why are more Hellbenders being released next year? And they're also curious about how they might know, or how you know when Hellbenders are ready to be released, and if it's based on age.
Well, I can probably take a stab at that one. Oh, Nick, you want to go for it, Nick?
Sure. So the question was, why are more Hellbenders being released next year? Is that correct?
Yes, why, and how do you know when they're ready to be released? And yes, Nick, if you want to answer that, thank you.
Yeah, so, we didn't talk about it, but, Nate mentioned that we have sort of 12 or 13 sites spread throughout the river to eventually repopulate. And so behind the scenes, we have calculated essentially how many Hellbenders need to go in these sites to be present at a number high enough that they're able to, one, overcome the natural deaths that some of them will happen to some of them. Some of them will get eaten, and some of them will move out of the sites. And we want to make sure we release enough Hellbenders in these sites that there's still enough left that they are able to come together and reproduce. So these sites have a specific number that we need to get to before we're confident that we've released enough to overcome deaths and animals moving away. As far as how do we know how they're old enough to be released, we release roughly between 3.5 and 4.5 years old. And that's based on a couple of things. One, it's based on size. So when animals are less than 3.5 years old, they're pretty small, and you definitely run the likelihood that more of them are going to get eaten by fish, and especially in this case, bass in the river, bass and bluegill. But once they get to about 3.5 to 4.5 years old, they're a little bit, a lot of them are too big to get eaten, at least by fish. They'll still be eaten by raccoons and otters, but they don't really grow past that point, so we don't worry about that. We just want to get them past that point where they're going to get eaten by fish. And the other thing is, we can't keep them for too long, because as they get bigger, they need more space and they require more resources, and we don't have the capacity in our various facilities to hold animals until they're 7 or 8 years old. So the roughly 3.5 to 4.5 year old age class is kind of our sweet spot. They're big enough to not get eaten, but they're not so big that we can't afford to keep them in captivity any longer.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Nick, you might also be able to answer this question. Someone wanted to know if there's any specific difficulties about raising Hellbenders when they're in captivity, and if there's also any parts of the process that have improved over time.
Well, there are parts of the process. I'm going to actually pass that off to Lee. I'll let Lee answer that question.
Thanks, Nick. I'd love to hear what you have to say, so we can follow up with that too. Let's see. Hardest. There's kind of a point in development that sometimes we lose a decent number of animals. That's pretty early on, maybe 2 to 3 months in. There seems to be a developmental stage that either you make it through or you don't, and we do tend to have a lot of loss in that time. And then anyone who makes it beyond that is usually kind of golden and pretty set from there. So I think we're still trying to figure out exactly what's going on in that time period and why that happens. So I'd say that is definitely a large topic. Now we can probably lose up to maybe even as large as 1/3 of the clutch. We can lose it at that point in time. So definitely lots of questions still to be asked and still to be answered through that early development. And I can't really think of anything later on. as long as you keep all your parameters in a good place. I think the hardest part is making sure your chillers are working every day and that you keep the water quality clean. So we do check water quality weekly and make adjustments, and sometimes do extra water changes and extra vacuuming and all that kind of stuff to make sure that that everything's set for them.
Thanks, Lee. I have 2 follow-up questions for you. Can you define what you mean by clutch? And then someone also wanted to know if you do genetic testing on the Hellbenders, and if so, what's their genetic diversity like?
Yeah, sorry. Clutch is a term for a group of eggs that are laid by the same female. So everybody is siblings within a clutch of eggs. So that's just what I mean by that. And females can lay anywhere from 100 to 300 eggs in one grouping. So she'll make all those at the same time and then lay them in a nest. And I'm sorry, I forgot what was the second part of that question.
The second part of the question was if you do genetic testing on the Hellbenders, and if so, what their genetic diversity is like, if any.
We have done a little bit of that, and actually that might be better for Nick or Nate to answer than myself, but I know you can tell parentage through genetic testing and also determine sex.
Yeah, so we don't do genetic testing on all of our Hellbenders, but we did do genetic testing before we ever got to the point where we were collecting eggs and raising Hellbenders. And basically what we found, we did genetic testing throughout the entire range of the Hellbenders. So all the way from Indiana up through Ohio, down to Georgia, over to Missouri, basically everywhere we sampled the entire population because we wanted to prepare for that point of, if we're going to raise Hellbenders in captivity, where should we get these Hellbenders from? And basically what we found was that the animals in Missouri and the animals in the southern part of the range, so it's what we call the Tennessee River Valley animals, those are not very closely related to our Hellbenders. So that basically ruled out those populations for captive rearing, which basically left us with the Ohio River population of Hellbenders. So Indiana, Ohio, the northern part of Kentucky, up to West Virginia and New York. That whole grouping of Hellbenders was good for our population. They're relatively closely related, evolutionarily. Big picture, they were closely related. And as far as health is concerned, so diversity, they did have relatively high genetic diversity. There weren't many signs of inbreeding, anything like that. So they're actually pretty healthy animal despite being relatively isolated in a lot of places. And that's sort of where we left it. We have so many animals now. We've done a little bit of testing, just as Lee mentioned, to determine whether the animals are male or female. So we knew which animals we can put in mostly breeding populations in captivity, but we don't test all the animals before we release them.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that information. I am going to wrap up the Q&A. I have one last question, and I think I am going to throw it to Nate, unless anyone else wants to chime in as well. But can the public help with Hellbender releases?
That's a great question. I'm actually going to pass that on to Nick because he actually coordinates most of the Hellbender releases.
That varies. So a lot of our Hellbender releases take place on private property, or adjacent to private property. So that's a little difficult. I can't really say whether or not these landowners would let me have people come through their property. We do have some releases that occur on public property or adjacent to public property. And, I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility that the public can come, although some of these are sensitive areas. They are nature preserves. And so I assume the DNR probably doesn't want a lot of people walking around a nature preserve. But the answer is not no. So if you're interested, then you could contact me, and we might be able to work something out. But I can't say if it's a yes or a no for sure. It's just a maybe.
Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Nate and Lee, for also being so gracious about playing hot potato with the questions I ask you. I'm going to throw it back to Mariah to finish this up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much to our wonderful panelists who took their time out today to be here with us and share their expertise with us. And thank you so much to the audience who spent your valuable time learning about Hellbenders. We just ask that you pass this information along to continue to make more people aware that Hellbenders are in need of help and that there are great restoration efforts happening. If you're interested, please follow those tips that were given earlier in tonight's presentation on how you can help, how you can get involved. And then if you'd like to ask any questions, I had an email address on that last slide, dfw@dnr.in.gov. Please feel free to send questions, or follow-up things to that email address, and we can take care of those and respond to you directly. We will also have an email going out to everybody who attended this panel, everybody who registered for the panel here within the next couple of days, and that will include additional resources about Hellbenders. It will include contact information, and so forth. So please be on the lookout for that so you can make sure that to keep up to date with us and to get all of those valuable resources. And just thank you all so much again for being here, both our panel and our audience, and take care. Have a great day. Night, rather.